With the nation's economic roadmap revealed, just how will the budget affect you? Make sense of all the facts, figures and changes to your hip pocket as we examine the Morrison government's plans to revitalise the economy. Find out what the budget means for you at news.abc.net.au.
Australia's greatest minds have a new dilemma.
Oh. What if you didn't have a choice to be good?
Can I ask a question of both of you? Have you ever done the right thing?
Would you give up the right to be bad?
Sometimes you've got to be a little bit naughty.
I do actually think he might be a bit of a sociopath.
What if an app punished you for doing wrong things?
You've really cornered me here, feeling a bit like a coalition politician on Q&A.
Tomorrow tonight, Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Trace and I, we're building a future. We're selling an idea of summers that never end. The company is called Lightwave, and we're making board shorts. It is my company, Trotter.
Snapper's building an empire.
Wait, this isn't what I came for.
I'm coming home, I'm coming home, I'm coming home to you tonight.
When did all this stop being fun?
Barons starts April 24 on ABC or log into ABC iView.
What's empathy training and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
This is an historic day.
Prime Minister told Parliament that
Ukraine's president accuses Russia of committing genocide as mass graves are found near Kyiv. A father and son killed and 2 others critically injured while bushwalking in the Blue Mountains. Tasmania's Premier calls it quits, saying he's got nothing left in the tank. And home sweet home, the employees sticking with flexible working conditions post-pandemic. This is ABC Late News. Hello, I'm Pamela Medlin. There's been widespread condemnation of the shocking scenes uncovered around the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The US Secretary of State said the images of violence against civilians are a punch in the guts. Germany has called for even tougher sanctions against the Kremlin, including banning Russian gas imports. Russia has rejected allegations of war crimes. Europe correspondent Isabella Higgins reports from Lviv.
The streets of this strategic city are still a battleground. Russia relentless in their mission to take the battered town of Mariupol. But they're struggling to gain control and they're blocking any planned evacuations, keeping tens of thousands of civilians trapped in the fighting. As Moscow turns its focus to the east of the country, the Kyiv region is back under Ukrainian control. The army is picking its way through the armour left behind, staying ready in case Russian troops regroup and come back. Ukraine says it's finding evidence of war crimes in the recaptured town of Bucha, northwest of the capital. Soldiers have found bodies of civilians, some with their hands and feet tied, left in the streets. Multiple sites of mass graves are being uncovered. Tetiana buried her husband's body after finding him in a basement.
I recognised him by his shoes, his trousers. His face was mutilated. He had been tortured and shot in the head.
The Ukrainian government is calling what happened in this town a deliberate massacre.
What did they do? Why were they killed? What did a man who rode a bicycle down the street do? Why did you try to kill ordinary, peaceful people in an ordinary, peaceful city? How is it possible to rape women and kill them in front of their children?
Off the highway west of Kyiv, Ukrainian troops have reached the village of Kalinivka. Locals have been cut off from the outside world for more than a month. Irina Kostyko's only son was killed by Russian troops. She had to carry his body home in a wheelbarrow and bury him on her own.
I covered the grave with a blanket to protect it from the dogs. He isn't in a coffin. I had to roll him in a carpet.
Despite the horrors, here in Lviv, we're finding people who want to go home to their ruined cities. Some want to join the fight.
I'm not worried about myself. I sent my wife and a daughter to Poland. I fulfilled my mission as a husband and a father. Now it's time to fulfill it as a man.
For weeks, this station has been full of Ukrainians who are desperately trying to escape their country. But military gains around the capital are changing the mood here. And today, these carriages are full of Ukrainians who are returning to their home.
They've been warned to stay away, but they're desperate to reclaim their lives. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Lviv.
Scott Morrison's one-time political rival is standing by his claims that the Prime Minister racially vilified him during a bitter pre-selection battle more than a decade ago. The Prime Minister flatly denies the allegations, describing them as outrageous. But as he prepares to call the election, opinion polls suggest he'll enter the race well behind his opponents. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
Gorgeous. This is Mr Albanese, mate.
Yeah, I'm running for Prime Minister. Anthony Albanese's on a mission to make sure every Australian knows who he is.
You look much nicer in reality than what you do.
Oh, actually good. Did you get that? Rushing to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Anthony Albanese.
In a contest increasingly about character.
A compulsive liar.
Scott Morrison's rival in the race to win Liberal pre-selection for the New South Wales seat of Cook has revived 15-year-old allegations, claiming Mr Morrison made racist comments to undermine his campaign.
Well, he's certainly used race in the past on several occasions.
Against you?
Against many other people.
I think I've been very clear. I absolutely reject that as malicious slurs. It is outrageous.
It doesn't stack up with the Scott Morrison I know.
Bruce Baird held the seat at the time, a friend of Mr Morrison's. He says the Prime Minister is not racist.
It's erroneous. The people who are making it are doing it in a way that I think lacks total credibility.
Elections are serious things. It's not a reality show. It's not based on who they like or don't like. They know it's about the economy. What's that?
If the coalition was hoping for a post-budget bounce, it hasn't been reflected in the latest opinion polls. News polls showing Labor's maintained its large lead over the coalition, 54 to 46% after preferences.
This election campaign, there'll be plenty of opportunity for scrutiny. Take us forward, Mr Sulu.
The Prime Minister is trying to boil down the campaign to experience in managing the economy, questioning Labor's uncosted commitment to pay for any wage rise for aged care workers awarded by the Fair Work Commission.
Is the coalition actually saying we can't afford to give older Australians decent food and decent care?
The Prime Minister's poised to call the election, but for once, the timing is out of his hands, with a court in New South Wales yet to resolve a fight over Liberal pre-selections in that state. In the meantime, the coalition's clearing the decks, appointing a raft of Liberals to lucrative taxpayer-funded positions in what Labor's already calling a jobs for mates rort. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
People who are eligible for a fourth dose of the COVID vaccine have begun getting their jabs. Health authorities are recommending an additional winter dose for people at higher risk of serious illness from COVID-19. Those eligible for a fourth shot include people aged 65 and older, aged care and disability care residents, those who are severely immunocompromised, and Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people aged 50 and older. The booster can be given at the same time as the flu shot. Authorities say if you've had COVID-19, you should wait at least 4 months before getting the additional dose. 2 bushwalkers have died and 2 others are in a critical condition following a landslide in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. A group of 5 people were on a popular walking track near Wentworth Falls this afternoon when part of the track gave way. A father and son were crushed by rocks while a woman and a teenage boy were critically injured, winched out of the site by helicopter rescue crews.
As you can appreciate, it's quite a tragic scene. We do have a girl that is walking out at the moment, who is obviously clearly extremely distressed, and we're trying to talk to her in relation to obtaining some further information.
Any situation as has been described is obviously exceptionally confronting, heartbreaking, especially when you start involving children.
Police say conditions in the area are extremely unstable after weeks of heavy rain. Emergency crews are still working to recover the bodies from the site. In New South Wales, there's more financial help on the way for people in flood-affected areas. Up to $20,000 will be available for uninsured residents in the state's northeast and Hawkesbury regions. The state government is footing the bill after the federal government declined to contribute.
Back from paternity leave, facing a second flood disaster.
We don't qualify for a small business grant.
The Premier couldn't come to Lismore empty-handed.
I think this investment today will help with things like gyprocking, carpeting, painting.
New grants of up to $20,000 are available to flood-ravaged households across 7 local government areas in northern New South Wales and the Hawkesbury in Sydney's northwest. But only uninsured residents and those who haven't claimed the disaster relief grant can apply.
$20,000 will go nowhere. But I mean, you know, like, I'm not wanting to sound ungrateful. Anything would be helpful.
Anything is welcome at this point, and getting money to people now is the thing.
More cash could have been on the table, but the state government says the Commonwealth wasn't on board.
We can't wait any longer. That is why we've gone alone. That is why we are announcing this package today.
I do want the federal government to step up more. It's a bit too slow.
I think we've got to do better when it comes to getting money out the door. It's not good enough.
The flood crisis is far from over. A few evacuation orders remain in place and floodwaters still surround towns. The Premier says he'll be in the region until Wednesday, visiting those hardest hit. Dominic Perrottet's visit to Lismore comes on the same day flood victims in emergency accommodation across the region are being moved on to make way for holiday bookings. A government department made the call last week, saying temporary accommodation would be made available in Queensland, with residents able to return to the North Coast after the school holidays. But when questioned on the issue this afternoon, it seemed the Premier hadn't been briefed.
I will take a look at that. Obviously, there's a balance here, and we've got to provide support for the communities, but we also need to ensure care and comfort for those people who've lost their homes, who are in temporary accommodation, and continuity of that accommodation is incredibly important for people.
To be evicted on the eve of the Easter holidays, right when you want family and community to be closer together, I think is outrageous.
A sentiment deeply felt by those living it. Rani Hayman, ABC News, Lismore.
Tasmanian Premier Peter Gutwein has announced he's resigning as Premier and will quit politics. The 57-year-old says the time is right to pursue other interests. Mr Gutwein became Premier in January 2020, just before pandemic restrictions were imposed around the country.
During this time, I've quite rightly focused on everyone else's family. I now want to spend some time focusing on my own.
The Liberal government still has 3 years to run in office after Mr Gutwein led the party to an election win in May last year. He recently took time away from the job due to health concerns. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan may have survived an attempt to oust him, but he could still lose his job if a court rules against him. The former cricketer has managed to successfully push for an early election instead of facing a no-confidence vote in Parliament. South Asia correspondent Avani Dice reports.
Police and paramilitary are out in full force in the streets of Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. The Prime Minister, Imran Khan, has managed to avoid a no-confidence vote designed to oust him from power. But tensions are only rising. Parliament has been dissolved and the nation will now head to the polls.
A democratic society mein hum Democrats.
We must now face an early election. Go to the people and let them decide. The corrupt politicians with their money bags and foreign conspiracies must not be allowed to decide the destiny of this country.
The opposition is angry at the Speaker's surprise decision to block the no confidence vote, and they say the move was unconstitutional.
United opposition ने ये फैसला किया है.
Our lawyers are now reaching the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister cannot dissolve the Assembly as the no confidence motion process against him had already began. He must face it.
The former cricketer was expected to lose the no confidence vote, with members of his own party indicating they were going to vote against him. As Prime Minister, his popularity has suffered. He's blamed for mismanaging the economy and for cracking down on political dissent. Imran Khan has accused the US of being involved in this plot to oust him. He says that America is angry at Pakistan's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is something the White House denies. No Prime Minister in Pakistan's history has managed to complete a full 5-year term. Imran Khan came to power nearly 4 years ago, backed by Pakistan's powerful military. Now, behind the scenes, it's understood the 69-year-old has lost their support. Avani Dias, ABC News.
Sri Lanka's cabinet ministers have all resigned due to growing public outrage over the country's economic crisis. Police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse hundreds of university students in the city of Kandy. The protesters were defying an emergency decree and curfew to call for the president's resignation. In an attempt to quell the anger, the 26 cabinet ministers have submitted letters of resignation, but the Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and his brother, the President, have remained. For months, Sri Lankans have endured long lines to buy fuel, food and medicine, which they blame on government mismanagement. 6 people have been killed in Sacramento when multiple shooters fired into crowds of people as they left bars and nightclubs at closing time. 12 people were injured in the attack, carried out by at least 2 gunmen who are still at large. It's the second mass shooting in 5 weeks in California's capital city.
We have families whose loved ones have been hurt, and we also have families who have loved ones that are just simply not coming home today. The scale of violence that just happened in our city is unprecedented during my 27 years here at the Sacramento Police Department.
Authorities found a stolen handgun and are reviewing video footage that appeared to show an altercation before the gunfire erupted. Secret documents obtained by Four Corners reveal allegations that an Australian SAS soldier brutalised corpses when fighting in East Timor in 1999. The claims in the documents are made by New Zealand Special Forces who fought alongside the Australians. There was an attempt to prosecute the soldiers, but that failed, and some believe that's had serious consequences for the military to this day.
It was just days into the Australian-led intervention in East Timor, and a militia ambush on a remote road left 2 Australian SAS soldiers badly wounded. The counterattack killed 2 militia fighters. It appeared to be a clear-cut engagement, but some of the New Zealand SAS who were there didn't see it that way.
Some of these guys were not happy with what happened at the scene. I believe that what they were telling to us was the truth.
Carl Fellauer was part of a military police team that conducted a special inquiry into what happened that day. Among the many soldiers that his team would interview were Kiwi SAS witnesses who alleged that an Australian comrade brutalised the bodies of the dead militia.
There was talk that a certain person had gone to town on the body, say, kicked and stomped on their head, and that's what upset a lot of the Kiwi SAS when they saw that going on.
Four Corners has obtained their statements. One Kiwi soldier recounted a conversation after the fatal firefight with an Australian comrade who told him of an alleged unlawful killing.
When the 2 bodies were recovered, one of them was not dead, and it got up and started to run away when Operator K arced him up.
After the incident, the Kiwi SAS confided in New Zealand legal officer Andrina Gill about their concerns about their Australian counterparts.
They thought they were doing, quote, dodgy activity. It would seem to me that if they said the word dodgy, I don't think they're making it up.
The Australian Federal Police would become involved in the military inquiry and a murder investigation pursued, ultimately finding insufficient evidence to support a charge. In the end, an Australian SAS soldier was charged with kicking the corpses, but the case collapsed. 2 decades on, some of those involved in the military police investigation believe the failed prosecution had serious consequences.
If things had been different and that protection had been given to the New Zealanders, I don't think we would have had some of the issues that we had in Afghanistan.
Mark Willesee, ABC News.
2 years on from the first work-from-home mandates, a revolution in work culture is reshaping Australian lives. The impacts are felt from CBDs through to the regions across the country as workers resist calls to return to the office.
Jenny and Wally are at work.
Work-life balance immediately became so much more positive for me.
Like millions, Jenny isn't going back to the office full-time, even as COVID restrictions ease.
I think giving the flexibility to your employees to work at home allows you to work the best way that suits you.
And her employer is delighted.
If a boss is saying you've got to come back to work, I think the reasonable question is why? Why do I have to do that? How does the business benefit? How does the individual benefit?
The pandemic has changed lives because over 1/3 of workers can do at least part of their job at home.
We've fundamentally challenged the traditional way of working on where, how and when work is done.
Compared to 2019, office occupancy in the Melbourne CBD is at 15%, and it's similar in Sydney at 18%. Even cities barely touched by restrictions are seeing far more empty desks now than before the pandemic. The combination of long commutes, cheap technology and newfound freedoms means 2 years into an experiment that was forced upon us, there's a new normal.
I'm not going to tell my people what day they need to be back in the office or how many days they need to be back in the office.
Major employers are weighing up how much real estate they need, now that office workers might only come in 2 or 3 days a week.
Gone are the days where you see the old brown carpet and brown walls and just a very stale type of office environment. That's not going to attract workers back to the office.
The tools that office workers use, like email, video conferencing and shared documents, have been around for decades. Many of them are free. What the pandemic changed 2 years ago is it forced bosses to trust their staff to work even when they couldn't see them. Daniel Ziffer, ABC News.
Singer Olivia Rodrigo and rock band The Foo Fighters were the big winners at the Grammy Awards. Aussie singer The Kid Laroi missed out on the Best New Artist award to Rodrigo, who also took home Best Pop Vocal Album and Best Solo Performance. The Foo Fighters won 3 awards just weeks after the death of their drummer Taylor Hawkins. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the audience from Kiev before John Legend performed with Ukrainian musicians.
Rain down, freedom, rain down, till we're all free.
Band Rufus Du Sol was the only Australian winner this year with Best Dance/Electro Recording. The NRL's Brisbane Broncos have been rocked by yet another off-field drama with 2 players caught in an alleged drunken brawl. A fight broke out between Brisbane 5'8" Albert Kelly and star prop Payne Haas after he complained Kelly had stepped on his white shoes. It's alleged the video was shot after Brisbane's win over the Bulldogs in Sydney on March 20. Haas, who is a 3-time Paul Morgan medalist, has twice been banned for off-field incidents. The duo could be fined or suspended following an NRL integrity investigation. The 2029 Women's Rugby World Cup is likely to be held in Australia, with the sport's governing body confirming it as preferred candidate. Australia had already been given preferential status for the Men's World Cup in 2027. The President of Australian Women's Rugby is confident both events will be secured at next month's vote of World Rugby Council members.
World Rugby, please look behind me. You're mad. We are so prepared and ready for this. We're the recipients of 2 World Cups, of course, with the men's team, and the women are on a journey, and we're very excited.
Australia has never hosted a Women's Rugby World Cup. Officials say it will help grow the women's game in this country and around the Pacific region. Australian women's cricket coach Matthew Mott says hitting rock bottom at the previous World Cup sowed the seeds for the triumph over England. Australia's 7th World Cup victory sparked exuberant scenes as a team-first mentality paid dividends.
With beaming smiles and a tight grip on the trophy, the Australian team was honoured with a presentation from the Christchurch City Council.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was more raucous last night. The celebrations were lively and zany, but there was also time for reflection after a flawless World Cup campaign.
For us to be able to come through undefeated and play one of our best games in the final is really impressive.
Elisa Healy starred with her record-breaking 170.
Is there anything she can't do?
But the ability of players to adapt to the game situation and different roles was another factor in the win.
Flexibility in our batting, the communication was everything that we asked for, selfless and team first.
We've got a very driven team here, and this sort of World Cup's been something, in the back of our minds for a long time.
5 years to be exact, when Australia had a shock loss to India in the semi-finals of the last World Cup.
We'd sort of hit rock bottom and, together, with a lot of the other leaders around the group, we tried to map out a plan to make sure that didn't happen again.
The English admit they're playing catch-up to one of the great women's cricket teams.
Australia obviously started their domestic setup and the investment in the women's game a little bit earlier than we did, but hopefully it will bear fruit in the next couple of years.
The future of the Australian team looks bright. The more immediate goal will be gold at the Commonwealth Games in England in August. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
Victoria has missed out on a 5th Sheffield Shield triumph in 8 years, with Western Australia claiming the title after a draw in the final in Perth. Victoria needed a miracle on the final day, with WA 6 for 313 in its second innings, already leading by almost 400 runs. WA only needed a draw to claim the Shield after taking the bonus point advantage following the first innings. The hosts moved to 7 for 400 at the lunch break when the captains agreed to call an end to the match. The result ends a 23-year Sheffield Shield drought for Western Australia, which has claimed all 3 men's domestic trophies this summer. Ange Postecoglou's Celtic has taken a major step towards the Scottish Premier League title after beating arch-rivals Rangers 2-1. Rangers scored the first goal of the match in the opening minutes, but the visitors quickly responded through Australian Tom Rogic, who levelled the scores just after 7 minutes. Celtic then found a winner late in the first half to move 6 points clear with 6 games to go. American golfer Jennifer Kupcho has won the first women's major of the year at the Mission Hills Country Club in California. Kupcho finished at 14 under to win by 2 strokes over Jessica Korda, despite dropping 2 shots in her final round. Australian Hannah Green finished in a tie for 8th, 6 shots back. And now to the weather with Paul Higgins.
A cold front crossing Tasmania will bring some showers there. For South Australia, this trough could bring showers to the agricultural areas. The trough over Queensland will weaken and high pressure starting to build across the south. So not much rain tomorrow, but Wednesday through to Friday, potentially heavy rain for eastern New South Wales. So watch out for that. Tomorrow in Queensland, sunshine across western and central parts and on the coast between Eyre down to the Sunshine Coast. The chance of a shower elsewhere, although mostly sunny in Brisbane. There's also the chance of a shower along the New South Wales coast and ranges, but more likely down in the far south. Areas of morning fog, another warm and sunny day for Sydney. In Canberra, fog, then partly cloudy. And there'll be areas of morning fog in Victoria, then mostly cloudy in the south, mostly sunny in the north, early fog, and then a mostly cloudy day coming up for Melbourne. In Tasmania, mostly light showers spreading throughout during the morning, but then contracting to the north in the afternoon, and some early sprinkles on the way for Hobart. A few showers in South Australia's west and over the agricultural areas. Quite a warm day coming up ahead of a southerly wind change. An afternoon or evening shower or 2 for Adelaide. In Western Australia, possible showers over the southeast, but a mostly sunny day for Perth. The chance of a thunderstorm over the far northern Kimberley, southeast Pilbara and northern Gascoyne. And some showers and thunderstorms over the territory north of Elliot. Afternoon storms for Darwin.
And that's ABC Late News. I'm Pamela Medlin. Thanks for your company. Good night.
What are you doing?
I'm making a miniature scene in a hole in the wall.
Meet Australia's Miniacs.
Wow.
A community of artists working tiny.
That looks good to me.
In a land of big.
1916, please.
Recreating history.
How do you move a zoo?
On a small scale.
What do you reckon happened here?
It's all about the little things.
Kind of been a hobby gone wrong in a way.
Join professional miniaturist Joanne Buzyanis-Selick and tiny enthusiast Jimmy Rees on a journey through time and space.
Inglorious, magical, miniature.
Tiny Oz starts April 19 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Hand-painted signwriting is definitely a dying art.
For him to go on television speaking Italian, my God, it will blow you away.
Who is this guy? This will remain an unseen, invisible, yet remarkable story.
Oh, I think you've got it.
Basketball's best are booming to the finals. Stream every electrifying play live on ABC iView.
What a statement.
The WNBL Finals. Stream all finals live on ABC iView.
Every Thursday on Q&A, your questions get the nation talking.
Stop with the pipeline dreams and start helping people out, because that's what needs to be done.
So if it was a different leader of the Liberal Party in a hung parliament situation, you might back the coalition.
Josh Frydenberg's paying a lot of attention to this answer.
Let me just get an answer.
Coming up, Virginia Trioli is joined by Steph Tisdale, Gideon Rosner and politicians from both sides. Q&A, Thursday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Welcome to the program. Another clean-up of Lismore is well underway, and at the same time, residents are confronting another issue. A housing crisis has left thousands of people with nowhere to live, and as Elias Kluwer reports, there's a lot of anger.
The floods crisis in northern New South Wales has taken a dramatic turn. The water is now inundating Lismore's central business district.
The floodwater that swamped Lismore for the second time in a month is starting to recede.
The heartbreaking task of a mammoth clean-up begins all over again.
This was a cruel deja vu for residents of the Northern Rivers.
You know, struggling to come back from the 2017 floods, let alone this one.
Last week's catastrophic flood was the last straw for many residents who had only just started to rebuild. At least 3,800 people are now homeless. Lauren de Groot and her daughter Freya are amongst them. Their apartment was flooded.
I spent quite a few hours just calling family and friends, saying goodbye, thinking that this was it. It's been really traumatising, and I don't really know how to come back from round two. Round one was bad enough.
After their narrow escape, a friend lent them this caravan for 6 months.
We have nowhere permanent to go. We have none of our previous possessions. We have no support from the government. We have all of these promises that aren't being followed through on.
It's not the first time Lauren and her daughter have been left homeless as a result of a natural disaster. In 2021, she lost her home to bushfires.
That house burned down in the middle of the night. I had to carry my daughter out in my arms as it burnt around us.
She's unsure of what they do when they hand back the caravan in about 6 months.
We are homeless. We were homeless for 3 months after the fire until I finally managed to convince someone to give me a chance. And I was paying a ridiculous rate of rent that left me, you know, on the poverty line because it was so high. And now I just can't see a way forward.
As a young mother, what's it like, I guess, being responsible for another human being when you're in this situation?
It's terrifying.
Community advocates say homelessness here has been a problem long before the floods. A lack of affordable housing, as well as the lack of public housing, has meant that this has been a problem for several years. The floods have only made it worse.
We already had a housing crisis here where 4 of our 7 local government areas and the councils in those areas had actually declared housing emergencies before the flood.
Some public housing has been destroyed. North Coast Community Housing has lost 115 houses.
The more affordable housing was in the south and north Lismore, and that's always been flood prone. It's attracted lower income families because it was more affordable to buy and to rent them.
At the local university, which has been turned into a makeshift evacuation centre, volunteers and caseworkers are attempting to house displaced residents into motels and caravans.
That can only ever be a short-term response. We're going to have more people that are going to be displaced over Easter. So if you can imagine the trauma that that's causing those families, I don't think it's acceptable in 2022 that we don't have a response to this.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister said the federal government is providing direct financial support and grants for New South Wales residents, businesses and community groups affected by the recent flooding. They said the New South Wales government is responsible for housing. A spokesperson from the New South Wales government told 7:30 that they acknowledged housing is its biggest challenge in helping the community recover from floods. It adds every person who comes to them for support for accommodation will get it.
We had staff up in the recovery centres, and one of the issues that they found was that there were a number of people, particularly people of an older age, that had those mobility issues, and the immediate responses like motorhomes and caravans are not a suitable response for those people.
Colin Brown has lived in Lismore for 40 years.
I've seen a lot of floods, but I've never been stuck in a housing one. I've always lived on higher ground. This is the first one I've actually been stuck in and had to get rescued.
A former car radiator installer, he can't walk because of an injury. His home was destroyed.
Approximately 1.5 metres of water straight through the house. Sort of lost everything.
He says he's yet to be offered any housing and is now living in his car.
Well, I just don't know where to go, what to do. Sitting in the car all day sort of doing nothing. Been out to the university for help and just can't seem to get any. Somewhere to shower would be nice. Somewhere it's got a shower I can get in and out of without a hassle. Just bathrooms, just stuff like that, it's a bit hard. Just fall through the cracks and I can't see how it's going to get fixed.
The New South Wales government says it provides a case management service which can help members of the community with a variety of needs.
I've got no idea where to go. When you leave here, I'll hop in my car and I've got no idea. I'll just sit in my car all day.
Many Lismore residents are facing more restless nights waiting for a home.
I have no idea. I'm just holding hope that something else will pop up for everyone who has been displaced.
A New South Wales government spokesperson says they have a range of temporary solutions in place, and anyone who's been affected by the floods and is in need of housing should contact them. Those details in response to that story are on our website. Australia's just days away from a federal election being called, and senior ministers are being forced to defend Scott Morrison's character. A former opponent has accused the Prime Minister of racial vilification in a pre-selection battle 15 years ago. Mr Morrison strongly rejects the allegations, but the internal unpleasantness is a distraction he can ill afford. James Glenday reports.
With the campaign just days away,
the clock is ticking.
Is there any more clarity?
Here we are on Monday, still no election date locked in.
I heard Anthony Albanese say, call the election now.
Enough of the pantomime. Call the election.
Set to go.
Even though it hasn't officially been called, the election campaign is effectively underway.
Please welcome Anthony Albanese.
The leaders of the major parties are meeting and greeting locals in key seats and taking part in the typical made-for-TV stunts.
Got any tips for getting off the bottom there, bloke?
But the only man with the power to formally fire the starting gun is still waiting for the right moment, after suddenly finding himself under attack from some in his own side.
We just have to call this out for what it is. It is a political hit by the Prime Minister's enemies on the eve of a campaign.
Morrison might profess to be Christian, but there was nothing Christian about what was done to Michael Toke.
Concetta Fierravanti-Wells is one of the PM's chief internal enemies at the moment. After the right-wing Liberal lost pre-selection, she last week let fly, attacking Mr Morrison's character and hinting at fresh allegations about how he won pre-selection for his safe Sydney seat of Cook back in 2007.
I'm advised that there are several statutory declarations to attest to racial comments made by Morrison at the time that we can't have a Lebanese person in Cook.
In the initial pre-selection ballot 15 years ago, Scott Morrison got just 8 out of 152 votes, and the rights-preferred candidate, Michael Toke, triumphed. However, immediately afterwards, there was a bruising, lengthy internal campaign to overturn the result, and ultimately, Mr Morrison was selected as the Liberal Party candidate. Over the weekend, media outlets, including 730, obtained the statements Senator Fierravanti-Wells was referring to. They were signed in 2016. In one, Mr Toke accuses Mr Morrison of urging pre-selectors not to vote for him because his family heritage was Lebanese, and suggesting that a candidate of Lebanese heritage could not hold the seat of Cook, especially after the Cronulla riots. He also alleges Mr Morrison told others he was being investigated for criminal and immoral activities, and states there was a strong rumour that I was actually a Muslim. 6 years on, Mr Toke, who is a Catholic Maronite, is standing by those comments.
Absolutely, yes.
And what do you make of the Prime Minister's denial?
Not very credible.
Do you think he's lying?
I think it's pretty obvious he is.
Do you think the Prime Minister's racist?
Well, it's hard not to, isn't it?
Well, all I can say is that it's just simply untrue. And these are quite malicious and bitter slurs, which are deeply offensive. And I reject them out absolutely.
In recent days, the government has urged journalists to put the allegations to Lebanese community leaders who support the Prime Minister.
So that is totally out of character for someone that I got to know all these years. It definitely does not stick with me.
While Bruce Baird, Mr Morrison's predecessor in the seat of Cook, rejects suggestions racial vilification played a key role in the pre-selection process.
Bear in mind that there are other strong candidates. I mean, we had Paul Fletcher, who's now Minister for Communications and Infrastructure, Mark Speakman, who's Attorney General, David Coleman, who is Immigration Minister, and Scott Morrison, who I knew quite well because he worked for me for 2 years.
But it's not the complex details of an old pre-selection that's really worrying the Prime Minister's team. It's that just weeks before Scott Morrison faces voters, there are some in his own party prepared to publicly deliver blunt character assessments. Mr Toke has indicated that he plans to speak out again this week. That is likely to only add to the damage for Mr Morrison. Both his predecessor, Malcolm Turnbull, and the French president have already publicly accused him of lying.
I don't think I know.
Oh, he's lied to me on many occasions.
While the Deputy PM, who last year called Scott Morrison a liar and a hypocrite in a text message, was today among the senior ministers insisting that voters should trust him.
Well, first thing is, what people say publicly and what people say in messages that should be kept private, because I never actually sent to the person who discloses them, is something completely different. But what we have seen is the Lebanese community have come out and backed Mr Morrison.
This saga has also triggered memories about a contentious 2010 shadow cabinet meeting. Scott Morrison was accused of suggesting the coalition exploit anti-Muslim sentiment, a claim he has publicly denied.
So when you raised those issues in that meeting, what did you say about them?
Well, I was concerned that we needed to address them, which is what I've been doing inside and outside of the Parliament for the last 10 years of my life.
Address those concerns?
Yes, to lower them.
A lot of the bad blood in the Liberal Party has surfaced now because of a broader dispute in New South Wales about the way some candidates for the coming election have been handpicked by a panel featuring the PM and the State Premier, instead of facing a ballot of local rank-and-file branch members. Some within the party are asking why pre-selections weren't finalised months ago, instead of now, on the eve of an election.
I've been here before.
The Labor Party can hardly believe its luck. It wants to campaign as much as possible on Scott Morrison's character.
You look much nicer in reality than what you do.
Actually good. The PM's team is now desperate to shift the debate back to its budget measures before Mr Morrison heads to see the Governor-General in a few days' time and the campaign formally begins.
7:30's chief political correspondent Laura Tingle's with me in Sydney. Laura, as we've just seen in James Glenday's package, a lot of the bad blood in New South Wales goes to an ongoing pre-selection battle. How unusual is it to have that unresolved when an election is due any tick of the clock?
Well, I can't ever remember anything like this and on a scale like this, Lee, in all the time I've been reporting politics. It's not. We've got 3 pre-selections of sitting members, including 2 ministers under question in a court case, and we've got 9 pre-selections announced on the weekend. Now, The Guardian is reporting that those 9 pre-selections may be subject to further legal challenge by somebody within the Liberal Party in the next few days. The 3 pre-selections that were lined up by Scott Morrison and Dominic Perrottet in a federal intervention about a week ago are due for judgment in the Court of Appeal tomorrow. So this is creating all sorts of uncertainty. Obviously, for the Liberal Party, it means that they don't have people on the ground campaigning with only a week to go at best until the election's called. And of course, they can't call the election when they don't have candidates. So it's really quite chaotic.
So there's plenty of brawling about people trying to get into the parliament or stay in the parliament, but there is one person desperate to get out of a parliament.
That's right. The Tasmanian Premier, Peter Gutwein, has announced today that he's going to leave politics. Now, he was hospitalised last year. I think the interesting thing about this is the first time we've seen one of our national leaders or state leaders really succumbing, if you like, to the pressures of the last few years of the pandemic. And this is what he was essentially saying was what had happened to him, that he just couldn't keep going anymore and giving that 110% that you needed under the pressure of the sorts of things we've had, like the pandemic in the last couple of years.
Laura, just finally, we saw Elias Kluwer's story earlier on the Lismore floods. There's more assistance going there too?
There is more assistance, but once again, it's this sort of mystifying question, Lee, about where is the federal government. The New South Wales government has announced today it's got this package of $20,000 of assistance for people who have lost a lot of their possessions and trying to fix their houses up who aren't insured. But it's not quite enough, and both the local member, Janelle Saffin, has questioned where the federal government is, and when asked about this today and what he knew about it, the New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet wasn't really sure whether the federal government would also be coming to the party. One of those mysteries of the current times.
Laura Tingle, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has entered a new phase with evidence of possible war crimes as Russia limits its objectives in the face of fierce resistance. After more than a month of fighting, Ukrainian forces have regained control of the region around the capital Kyiv as Russia claims it's redeploying its troops. But distressing images are emerging from formerly occupied towns such as Bucha, where the bodies of hundreds of civilians were found lying dead in the streets.
We believe that Russian forces have committed war crimes, and there needs to be accountability for it.
Die Ermordung von Zivilisten ist ein Kriegsverbrechen.
The murder of civilians is a war crime. We must relentlessly investigate these crimes committed by the Russian armed forces.
Russia continues to deny all war crime allegations. Keir Giles is a Senior Consulting Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House and the author of Moscow Rules. Mr Giles, how persuasive, or otherwise, do you think the evidence is that Russia has committed war crimes in Ukraine?
Well, there's no doubt the lawyers and diplomats will argue over both what they're seeing and whether it actually meets the technical definition of genocide. But for ordinary people, there's absolutely no doubt. And of course, for Russia watchers, unfortunately, it doesn't come as a huge surprise if they've seen how Russia wages its wars, and also if they've understood Russia's own rhetoric and its own domestic propaganda about how Ukrainians are not a real people. The trouble is that Ukrainians themselves, simply by existing, upend all of that. And it's not surprising that Russia perceives a movement, a resistance, people of military age that posed a threat simply by living and wanted to exterminate them. Now, Russia, of course, will be busily trying to undermine every single piece of evidence that's coming out. And we've seen a massive outpouring of Russia's social media armies, the trolls, the bots, trying to pick apart every single piece of evidence that's coming out. And that effort will continue, as we've seen before in places like Syria. But the basic facts on the ground remain.
In international law, there are rules of war that govern the difference between things such as combat deaths and civilian deaths. We know that Ukrainian civilians have been fighting to defend their country. Does that complicate the question of whether war crimes have been committed or not?
Well, the issue is really a different one, which is that definition of war crimes and what is acceptable and permissible and even morally justifiable within the context of a war is completely different for Russia and its armed forces than for Western militaries. Western militaries try to avoid civilian casualties, collateral damage, whereas for Russia, they're a tool of war. They're a way of winning as rapidly as possible. And again, throughout the centuries, we've seen Russia imply this. What looks to modern eyes like unlimited medieval barbarism is simply how Russia goes about winning its wars.
We're hearing that Russia has withdrawn from certain areas of Ukraine. How is its military campaign going at this stage?
That withdrawal, as well as what everything Russia has been saying about its military campaign, is an admission of failure by Russia. They thought Ukraine would fall into their hands because they didn't think there would be resistance. And that's the reason why the Russian armed forces basically didn't prepare to actually fight a war, which is what explains their chaotic performance in the early days. But now Russia is trying to pull back, regroup, get a breathing space for itself, and then relaunch its offensive in the east of the country after reinventing what it wanted from the war to just cover those eastern provinces.
So given those failures, does that bring any sort of internal pressure on Vladimir Putin?
The biggest problem is what Vladimir Putin actually thinks is happening. It's plain that he launched this war on the basis of a fantasy about what Ukraine was and what his own armed forces were. So the question is whether reality has actually impacted on that fantasy. He can't have failed to notice that he hasn't won the war yet, but the question is why he thinks that is, and whether those people around him are actually feeding him genuine information about the situation on the ground, or whether he thinks, in fact, that he can push forward and still conquer the whole of Ukraine.
The US is reportedly considering tougher sanctions. What impact are the sanctions currently having on Russia, and are they going any way to persuading Putin to change course?
They don't seem to be having any impact on President Putin himself. The impact is mostly felt on ordinary Russians, but they, of course, have no influence on political processes. And these sanctions, of course, are supposed to be a long-term measure. So the key thing is not to lift them if there is some slackening in the fighting or some ceasefire, which, of course, would only at this point advantage Russia, who's on the back foot in this war.
Keir Giles, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In March, we brought you the story of two refugees who'd spent nearly 9 years together in immigration detention. One had just been freed, while the other remained in detention at Melbourne's Park Hotel facility. Over the weekend, there was good news. Ashlyn McGee reports.
Hi, my name is Hossein Latifi. I'm Iranian. I came by boat to Australia in 2013. I came to Australia for freedom and safety. My age was 24. I'm 32 right now. And it's been almost 9 years to stuck on this situation.
When we met Hossein Latifi in late March, he was locked up at Melbourne's Park Hotel. Now he's a free man, released on his 33rd birthday.
I've been busy all the day.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. What's going
So
on?
lovely to meet you. It's a big adjustment. He had just 15 minutes to pack his things. And now he's here at this hotel in Melbourne's industrial outer west.
Yeah, this is my room. After almost 9 years, I get here last night and I slept maybe 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And I woke up, I think, 8. No more security. You can do whatever you want.
You're a free man.
I'm going to tell you so hard.
He spends Saturdays shopping, choosing new clothes, picking what he wants to eat, and visiting a gym. By night, his adrenaline is still pumping. 9 of Hussein's friends were also released on Friday, and it's a reunion here in the hotel car park as they meet up with others freed in the months earlier. Why do you think you were released?
Because of election. The federal government is saying we spend 56,000 per night. It's not make any sense.
The government says its policy has ended maritime people smuggling to Australia. From more than 200 refugees and asylum seekers locked up in hotels in December 2020, there are now just 33 left, including 8 at the Park Hotel where Hussein was.
It's very hard, but again, I'll be successful. Not only me, all the refugees, because they've been in a very tough situation, very difficult situation, and that's made me tougher. Okay.
Hussein's life now is full of the big stuff, like whether the US will take him under the refugee resettlement deal. And also the small stuff, public transport cards, bank accounts, Medicare. But this Saturday night, it's just about savouring the moment.
I want my friends to be out soon and see them out having coffee, like now. That's all I want. Because the freedom is very important for human. Yeah, that's all.
An Australian curling duo secured Australia's first ever win in the Olympic sport at Beijing. They overcame dramatic odds to make history, and they shared their story with producer Raveen Hunjan.
Being on the ice for me is just pure joy and excitement for what's about to happen. You know, there's so much focus that's involved. You have to make shots so precise.
It's a mixture of strategy, physical, you've got the sweeping element, and then you've got the team camaraderie.
But also the endurance from sweeping. And then there's a lot of the mind games involved too. So there's a lot of strategy and the mental toughness involved with the pressure as well.
It's kind of like you're on another planet. It's really weird to explain, but when everything sort of clicks and it just feels right, it feels like this is where you're meant to be and this is where you belong. Dean and I became a partnership around 2018. He was sort of like, my goal is to get to the Olympics one day for curling. Would you be interested in going on that journey with me, basically? And I was like, oh my God, yeah. Like, the Olympics has been on my mind since I was like 8 years old. I wanted to be an Olympian. So when I got that call, I was like, absolutely, I couldn't say yes quick enough.
So Tali lives in Brisbane and I'm in Melbourne. So for us, you know, we've been on Zoom basically our whole career together.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. How about you?
Thank goodness for technology. And yeah, I guess COVID as well definitely added another barrier. So a lot of strategy, a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of our own thing. But when we're together, we absolutely make the most of it. Dean and I both sweep our tiles at home. Yeah, I like to put on curling and watch it. Dean has his thing too. I'm not sure where he does it. I think it's in a bathroom.
So I practice on my bathroom floor on the tiles because I find that's got the kind of good slipperiness.
Dean is very analytical. He likes to know all the information. He's very, procedure-based.
That kind of is shown by how I don't really smile when I'm throwing and I'm quite intense. I kind of have these death eyes as I throw.
Whereas for me, my personality is very go with the flow.
She prefers to have that kind of light, laid-back approach to when she plays, and the key with us though is to have fun out there, and that's when we play our best.
Both Dean and I actually got involved in curling from our mums.
So you brought this album down. Oh, I was like 5 months old, wasn't I?
Yeah, yeah.
Jeez. My mum, she's originally Canadian, and obviously it's so huge in Canada, and she taught my dad, who's Australian, so pretty much my whole life I've been brought up around curling, and same with Tali.
My mum, in terms of the role she's had in my curling journey, is basically been my coach, my mentor, my inspiration, and one of my biggest supporters. Mum has played a very large role in why I'm an Olympian.
It was so exciting getting into Beijing and the village there to see the other Aussie athletes as well and the Aussie HQ. Like, it's so special. And that's, you know, a dream come true.
I think I describe seeing the rings as like an out-of-body experience in a way, because it's just something that I've been so passionate about and so driven to achieve since I was so young. And just seeing it is kind of like, am I here? Like, is this me? Is this my life? Yeah, it just like pinched me all the time. Basically, after, you know, testing negative a few times, and unfortunately I had returned a couple of positive tests and got a very sad phone call saying that our campaign would be cut short. Probably heard the news by now that unfortunately our Olympic campaign ends today.
That was pretty tough, you know, there was a lot of tears, and just not knowing that we couldn't finish off our campaign was the toughest part.
And then, yeah, basically I had a great medical team, a great support team that were able to review my case, and I got the all clear to compete. And it was basically get the call, you know, I had my suitcases packed, I ripped them open, I was running to the taxi, we were running into the rink, and yeah, we just played those last two games like we had nothing to lose.
Australia into the Winter Olympic Games.
It was so huge for the sport and for Australia to actually win those last two games. First wins ever that Australia's achieved at an Olympic Games is pretty special for curling.
I think when you're faced with so many obstacles and barriers, you just really have to stay positive, listening to that voice that believes in you, and that's the only voice that you need to listen to. Everyone else, whether they're telling you can or you can't, it's whatever you're telling yourself that will be your reality.
Our goal from here is the 2026 Olympics. From there, we actually want to stand on the podium. That's where we want to be in 4 years' time, and we're pushing so hard for that.
That's the program for tonight. Thanks for your company. Good night.
It doesn't change who you are.
The Prime Minister told Parliament
Justice and humanity.
DW News, live from Berlin. Shock and horror. Evidence mounts of a civilian massacre by Russian soldiers near Kyiv. The devastating toll of the war becomes clear as dead bodies with hands bound lie in the streets of the capital suburbs. Ukraine's president has accused Moscow of genocide.
These are war crimes and will be recognized by the world as genocide. You are here and can see what happened for yourselves.
Plus, the UN's top climate scientists say it is now or never to save the planet. A new landmark report is calling for drastic cuts to fossil fuel use and fast. Without that, experts warn climate change could spin out of control. And music's biggest night, the Grammy Awards, roars back to life for the first time since the pandemic. But the superstar celebration gets a dose of reality with an address by none other than the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky. Hi, everyone. I'm Leila Harak. Thank you very much for joining us. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of genocide following the killings of hundreds of civilians in the town of Bucha, near the capital, Kyiv. Mr. Zelensky was speaking from Bucha, where he traveled to see firsthand the devastation left behind following the withdrawal of Russian troops. He condemned the massacre and called the killings war crimes. Moscow claims they were staged. While images of mass graves and dead civilians showing signs of torture have sparked widespread international condemnation. Several EU countries are now pushing for tougher sanctions against Russia. And a warning to our viewers. This next report contains disturbing images.
As Ukrainian forces recapture territory to the north of Kyiv, reports of what Russian troops left behind continue to emerge. Civilians with their hands tied, apparently shot at close range. Dozens of other bodies have been found in mass graves.
What we see in Irpin and what we see in Bucha are horrible images. And unfortunately, these images are not from a film, but reality. It is the terrible reality where civilians are shot dead with hands tied behind their backs.
Ukraine's Prosecutor General says more than 400 bodies have been found in towns surrounding Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian forces must be held responsible.
I call on all our citizens and friends of Ukraine in the world who can join this work and help establish justice to do so. The world has already seen many war crimes at different times on different continents. But it is time to do everything possible to make the war crimes of the Russian military the last manifestation of such evil on earth.
Russia has rejected the claims, calling what happened in Bucha a fake attack and yet another provocation by the Ukrainian government. But people here describe killings by the Russians.
He went to get some wood when all of a sudden the Russians started shooting. They hit him above the heel, crushing the bone, and he fell down. All the people who were going to this area were shot. We were afraid to go out because if they saw you, they would shoot you. I am so afraid to talk to you. I'm afraid they will come back.
Talks were set to resume between Ukrainian and Russian negotiators today. The horrifying images from Bucha will no doubt make the hard task of finding a diplomatic solution even more difficult.
And we're going to take you now to Bucha, to Nick Conley, our correspondent in Ukraine, who is in the town there. And Nick, what have you seen?
Well, where I am just now in the centre of Bucha, I'm standing next to some 10-story apartment blocks. Not a single one has been left untouched. All the windows blown out, cars destroyed, burnt out, charging point for electrical cars. This is basically a town that was destroyed before it was even finished. This was a suburb of Kiev where young families were moving to, lots of construction, and now that is all over. Around me, shrapnel, bits of artillery shells, wooden crates for ammunition, lots of pets, dogs running the streets, obviously without their owners, and lots of people just in deep, deep shock. We've just come from one of the biggest mass graves, which is next to a church. As we understand from the locals, that was the place that they brought the bodies of people who'd been shot on the streets and tried to at least give them some temporary burial that way. It's a very difficult site. It's a deep, deep pit, and you can see there's just layers and layers of bodies. Some were buried in sheets, in blankets, others in plastic sacks, and some there was nothing, and you see kind of hands and other bits of bodies coming out of the sand at the bottom of that pit, and a lot of fear among people who still hear of mines, of traps, booby traps, so a situation that's still very, very raw and very, very fresh, and most people still haven't come back yet. The local authorities are telling people who've left to not come back, it's not safe yet, and to wait.
And the few people that are left, Nick, what are they telling you?
Well, you hear the most kind of difficult